Previously on Diskless Tandys.
That's probably a tad too long for a YouTube video. We're going to touch on something that I have been fascinated with, MS-DOS. We're going to top Windows 3.1 on top of MS-DOS, and we're going to do this with Windows 95. A Tandy 2500 SX25, Tandy Multimedia PC MMPC Model 20, Dell Dimension XPST 600R, the College Bro Machine, Windows NT Server, Resource Kit, Networking Guide. This, and we're going to go down and select remote boot. Don't type 386, it's not going to work. Okay, we're going to configure the NIC, and look, there is this address. Starting MS-DOS, baby. Windows 3.1. The instructions specifically tell us that we want to run Express Setup. Time now to install Windows 95, and as you can tell, it must be the next day because I'm dressed differently. And it is, in fact, the next day. All right, so looking at the documentation, the very first thing we need here is this, the Windows 95 CD-ROM. The server-based setup software for Windows 95 and all of the stuff that configures it, let alone the Windows 95 distribution files, are on this disk. And like I said, there's a special utility that will configure server-based setup for us, so we're going to need this disk. Moving on to the next page, we've got a whole bunch of steps that we have to follow, and the first set of steps is actually on the server. So the first thing we want to do here, or the first step, I guess, is I want to go create a shared directory for server-based setup. So I'm just going to go to my computer and into my C drive, and we'll do the new folder business. I'm going to call this SBS, and that is SBS for server-based setup. And then we're going to go share that directory out to the rest of the network. We're going to call it SBS Windows 95 server-based setup. Why? Permissions we're going to leave as everyone because well, I could restrict it here at the share level. The underlying NTFS file permissions will take precedence over this, and in fact, they're pretty open anyway. And I'm not going to mess with that because it gives me the greatest chance of success. You'd probably lock it down later, but honestly, there's not really much reason to change this right now. So we're just going to leave it as it is. That's going to be fine. And as my user account, my Chris account, should already have access to upload files here. So now it says the next step is to install one regular Windows 95 client on the network. Done, we already have one of those. Now let's go log on to the Windows 95 client and continue following the steps. At the Windows 95 machine, this is my Tandy Multimedia PC Model 20, not yet devoid of its hard disk. We're already logged on. Mystify Your Mind is running. We're going to insert the Windows 95 CD-ROM. And of course, I'm sure the welcome is going to come up here. Autoplay is going to do its thing. There we go. Yeah, don't care. This machine is actually running a newer version of Windows 95, so this specific release wouldn't work. That's C400950B. Or it might work, but it's not the one that we're going to use. Okay, so let's actually go exploring on the disk here. And we're going to open this. And we're going to go to Admin, Net Tools, and Net Setup. And we're going to run netsetup.exe. And the way that this works is we set a path, and this is going to be a network path. I could map a drive, but why am I going to do that? Windows 95 supports UNC names, so there's not really any reason to do that. So we're going to send this to Chicago, not 0, suburb, whack SBS, and I should, okay, now click the install button. Now we have a choice to make. Shared files can be used by more than one program and by more than one person. Space can be saved on users' hard disks by leaving the shared files on the server. I want them to be on the server. I'm going to install from d:/win95, that's my CD-ROM drive, and of course we're going to Chicago Suburbs SBS folder. And now the installation of the Windows 95 files begins. Now, this is very important, and this question, it will ask you if you want to create a default setup script, and the answer is you do not want to create the default. And it says here, down on step 7, don't create the default. And now it wants a product identification number, which quite frankly, they're all over the internet, so whatever. I don't even know that it looks. And here we go. These files are going to copy. We'll check back when they're done. All right, we're coming toward the end of the third file copy. This is the third phase. This box comes and goes, counts to 100. It's done it. This is the third time. And now we have a phase where we mark all the files read-only. So when you first watch that copying files dialog and it gets to 198, 99, think, yeah, I'm done, and then it does it again. Then you sit there for another 5 or 6 minutes, and then it does it again. But that one goes faster. So there you go. Windows 95 installation is complete, which is not really. No machine can use it. None of the clients have installed it into their own profiles yet. But the installation of server-based setup is complete, and the Windows 95 files are, in fact, on the server. So now, let's go back to the server. So I'm going to open up a command window here, and we are going to navigate ourselves to the Windows NT CD-ROM, which I have dutifully installed into Drive D. And now we're going to go to Clients, Update, no, it's RPL, right? RPL, Update, Win95. There we are. We have our batch files. It's Win95, SRV, and we need to tell it where we installed the SBS files, and that happens to be in C:\SBS. And now it's going to go update the files, and you can see this doesn't take very long. It says the update of server with Windows 95 tree is complete, and now it says if we're updating from Windows version 3.51 or earlier, then there's another program we have to do to update the database for Windows 95 remote booting, but we don't have to do that. So now we need to go Start Remote Boot Manager. And if I can move my mouse. And we need to check installations. And I will also fix security. I always like to do that as well. And now, I'm not going to create it yet, but I want to see if, oh no, sorry, new profile. Not going to create it yet, but I should see Windows 95 profiles, and I do. Perfect, and there's my Etherlink 3.1. Okay, so before we can go ahead and actually get Windows 95 installed, we have to boot the MMPC Model 20 from MS-DOS, which we haven't done yet. So looking here at the bottom of the page, of course, installing the first Windows 95 client requires booting to MS-DOS, which we're about to do. Once we have installed the first client, it's easy to install subsequent clients. We're not going to do the subsequent clients, of course. On to the next page here, and the next thing we have to do is go create a machine directory. Now, the Windows 95 CD-ROM offered to do this, but the documentation in the Windows NT Server Resource Kit has you do it yourself. So we're going to go do that, and we're going to go to Drive C again. We're going to create another new folder, and I'm just going to call this one Machine. And this is for, there we go. Just took its time. The machine directory is where the individual machine installations of Windows 95 will live. So each time you install a Windows 95 machine, each installation gets its own directory on the server that has its file specific to its configuration. So the profile logic from before for MS-DOS still applies to a degree, but Windows 95 does kind of abstract some of that in that you have profiles at the core real mode level with the network drivers, and then you've got another side for the protected mode side. That's essentially the distinction there. Protected mode is in machine, real mode is in CWinNT, RPL, RPL files, bin files. All right, and we need to share this directory as well. And we're going to share this as machine, and this is Windows 95 machine. Okay, and again, the permissions should be fine as they are. They are. And now we're good there. Okay. So we need to boot the client to Windows 95, and of course we haven't removed the hard drive yet. We haven't actually done anything to get the RPL boot ROM in place, so that is actually our next step before we can move further on the software side. And here we are, all reassembled. I've removed the XT IDE Universal BIOS from the option ROM socket on the Etherlink 3 card. I have installed the multi-boot ROM in its place, the same ROM that I used on the 2500 here. And I have disconnected the hard disk. So I did not disconnect the power. It's inconveniently located. Still hear it spinning, but it's not going to work. And it's a 4 gig drive that's been formatted with the XTI Universal BIOS. It wouldn't work anyway. But you're going to see that it's not going to be there. It's not going to do anything. So let's get this thing powered up. And now because I have put the 32K ROM back in, I have to do the same thing with the network card configuration here. That should become painfully obvious. It should tell me here. Yes, okay. That means I got the ROM is properly installed and it still recognizes it. Okay, so let's press F1. I'm going to boot MS-DOS, and we're going to go through the same thing that we always do with this 3C509 utility. I'm going to boot into that. We're going to set up the card and get it set for 32K. So you may as well watch this again, because what the heck? The way to learning is repetition. Isn't that right? And also, it looks different running on a different machine. I don't care. You can skip this part. And we're going to configure the NIC again. And this one, actually, this is where you really need to make a note of the network address settings, because this will matter in Windows 95 setup. So note your base address and note your interrupt. If you get them wrong, Windows will blue screen when it goes to do the first protected mode startup after you run Windows 95 setup. Ask me how I know. So let's go down to the boot ROM here. Let's set this to 32K. D is fine. And we're going to go OK. And we're going to quit. OK. Now, of course, as you probably remember from before, we don't yet have a profile for this machine. It hasn't been configured. There's no workstation set up for there. So what we've got to do now is give this thing a boot and make sure our boot ROM works, and then we've got to go link it to one of the MS-DOS profiles so we can run Windows 95 setup. So let's do that. Just Control-Delia. And this time I should be able to hit Control. I should get the Etherlink 3. Little splash. There we go. RPL, F10. OK. So of course this is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to sit here and count. Let's go back to the server. And now let's see if the machine appeared here. It's going to hit F5. Hey, there it is. 006008, and that's my network. All right, let's see if we can convert this thing and associate it with a profile. And no, we can't, because we have the same problem as we had with the other one, is that the MAC address, the OUI part or vendor ID, is not associated with a 3COM Etherlink 3 adapter. So we've got to go add it. So let's go do that. And we're going to add it for both DOS and Windows 95. So we're going to RPL CMD. And we're going to boot, enumerate, and 2, because I need to get the boot block file for each one. So let's start with whichever one we come through first. I believe Windows 95 actually uses H just like DOS. OK, there we go. 3COM Etherlink 3. OK. So let's do Windows 95 first. And important point of fact, because I actually made this mistake the first time I was playing with this, it's W95H, not Win95H. So I found that out the hard way. We're going to add, this is going to be W95H. OK, this is going to be, what did I say, 006008. And the BBC file is this. And this is going to be Win95 Etherlink 3006008, and the window size is in fact going to be 0. Okay, now I'm going to add another one for DOS. So let's go find that one first. Boot block file, find a DOS H one. There it is, right in the middle. Edit, mark. Okay, boom. Okay, let's boot, add. Okay, this is going to be DOS H 006008. And we'll paste that boot block file in. For those wondering, yelling at your screen, just use the control keys. You can right click. Not in NT4, you can't. Okay, and 0. And I meant to do that as not the boot comment, but whatever, I don't care. The boot comment's 0. I don't give a rat's. Okay, so I'm going to quit this now. And now we should eventually, I'm going to reboot this machine now so that it's ready to go. So once I do this last step and link it to the profile, we'll just be ready to go, but the machine won't do something behind my back while I don't have the camera on it. So let's just go set that up. So I'm in the boot screen, configuration screen, where I choose RPL on the network card ROM. So I'm going to leave it there. Now that we've done this, let's go back to here. And I have to go right back to convert adapters again. And look, see, now it works. Yay. We're going to call this machine MMPC20. This is the Tandy MMPC Model 20. And you know my password. It's going to be MMPC20, because only the most secure passwords for me, folks. And we're going to use DOS 6.2. Do not use a Windows 3.1 profile. Windows 95 setup will see it, so you want to use a DOS profile. And that is what the doc says. OK, so now we need to actually boot this thing and log it on. Hopefully it boots, and we should be able to run MS-DOS and then do what we need to do to get Windows 95 set up loaded over on the MMPC Model 20. So let's flip over there. And back at the MMPC Model 20, we're here at the boot work screen, waiting to press F10 and do the RPL boot, which hopefully succeeds. And it does. Okay. Of course, our username here is correct. It is MAC address linked, MMPC20. And we know that the password is the username, because security. And we're starting MS-DOS. Perfect. Let this finish booting up, and then we have one more step on this page, and that is we're going to have to log onto the network with a user account that we'll be using to access the server-based setup files. So I'm going to use the same account that I use when I install Windows 95. I'm going to use my account from the domain Chris. And I'm Chris, and I have a password. I'll log off the other user, and the domain has successfully logged me on. Well, that was easy. Moving on to the next page, and this is super important. So I mentioned earlier that the date and time are not correct on this machine. You need to make them at least match the server. If you don't, the real mode portion of setup will appear to succeed. The GUI setup will run, it'll copy a bunch of files, and then when you get to the point where you're actually rebooting into your new Windows 95 profile, you're going to get a real mode file access error, and you're not going to get any further. So you'll have to start again. You'll have to delete the machine directory and start all over again. So we're going to make sure we have the date and time intact. I'm going to look over on the server here, and it is 16:35 on March 7th, maybe? There it is. Yep, March 7th. Okay, so let's do that. Date, 3/7/2025. Time, that's going to be 16:35. Okay, that should be close enough. They don't need to be to the second, but you really do want them to be close. The next thing we have to do is mount our server-based setup directory, and we'll do that as drive F, net use, F, suburb, whack, SBS, net use, and now we need to mount the machine directory. And this isn't an individual directory for this machine. This is just where the machine directories go, and that's on the server as well. And this is going to be drive G, whack, whack, Chicago, suburb, whack, machine. Command completed successfully. Great. So now, of course, we need to go over to our newly mounted F drive, and we need to run setup with the /t option. That's a temp directory. So setup needs a place to store its temporary files, but you don't want to use the name of the directory where the machine directory will go. So you want to give it a temp directory. So what I do is just use the planned machine name directory with .tmp appended to it. So that's what we're going to do. G:// and this is mmPC20.tmp. And now it says it's going to perform a routine check, but it's really not, and ScanDisk is going to flash by so quick, I don't even know if the capture will capture it. There we go. Please wait while setup initializes, and now this is going to look just like Windows 95 setup, except with some different prompts. Okay, setup is now preparing the Windows 95 setup wizard. All right, here we go. And now, do I accept the Windows 95 license agreement? You bet your ass I do. All right, Windows 95 setup wizard. You're used to this. You've seen it a million times. Oh, but we have a new cool dialog here. Click the type of installation you want, then click Next. I can either copy Windows files to my computer, which ain't going to work because there's no hard drive, or I can set up Windows to run from a network server, and no files will be copied to my computer. And I want to, this is my favorite prompt, start from a hard disk, start Windows from a floppy disk, start Windows from a network, remote boot server, which is what we're doing. Okay, now this is where you want your real machine directory. So G://, that's my map drive. This is going to be MMPC20. And now it's going to go check for installed components. Good luck. And better have available disk space. It's the servers. Now this is important. The manual, as you see here, says to choose the custom option, and that's actually pretty important. It's for advanced users and system administrators only. Do I count as a system administrator when I'm running this crap in my computer room, folks? I guess I can call myself an advanced user at least. Okay, so this will be TJBChris, and I'm going to call this the Charles B. Tandy TRS-80 Emporium. I want to modify the hardware list. This is the bottom of page 631. Do not let it scan everything. You've got a better chance of hardware detection failing and blowing up setup. So here's what we want to do. We're going to pare this down to what we know. I'm not going to have you scan for a CD-ROM drive. It's IDE. It'll find it anyway. The display, I'm going to uncheck this, and then I'm going to check the one display adapter that I know it is, because it's Cirrus Logic. Floppy controllers is fine. Hard disk controllers, We'll just uncheck that one because it's not. There's only one keyboard. We don't want any of the mice that aren't PS2 because that's the kind of mouse I'm using. Network adapter, I'm going to uncheck all of these and then recheck 3COM Etherlink 3 network adapter. If this thing had PCMCII sockets, I'd be surprised. It does not. Ports, we'll keep those. There's no SCSI controllers. And there is a sound card in it. It's not connected to speakers, so I'm not going to bother. And now this will go a lot faster when you're not analyzing all the hardware and scanning everything. It's amazing how fast that goes, actually. It's pretty cool. I remember when I first installed Windows 95, it taking forever. Okay, so now on the next page here, let me just get you over to the next page. It wants us to exclude, I already mentioned the hardware types. It wants us to exclude the communications. I'm actually going to go in there and customize it a little bit. Double click that, and I wanted the checkbox. And that's because I want hyperterminal. Because if I want to use the serial port, I can do that. And it does tell you, if you're going to use a modem, go ahead. We have no need for disk tools. Microsoft Exchange, no thank you. Microsoft Fax, double no. No multimedia, because I'm not installing the sound card. And the Microsoft Network, haha. Okay, next. Now we have to add our network adapter, so let's do that. This is a 3COM. Now, this is important. I mentioned a while ago, you want to turn off plug and play. You want the card in ISO mode. You need to make sure you pick that if you're using the 3COM Etherlink 3 and you've turned off PMP, which you should have. So this is a 3C509, 3C509B in ISO mode. Okay. All right, we're removing client for netware networks because there's no netware. We're removing IPX, SPX. We are going to add TCP IP. So TCP, but mainly IP. And this should be set for DHCP, which is really all I want. Now this next part is super important. So if you don't do this, this portion of setup will finish. You'll boot real mode when you get past the next bunch of steps from the documentation here. And then once it flips from real mode to protected mode, Windows will crash. And that's because you have to go in here and manually tell it where the hell the card is. If you don't, this won't work. Ask me also how I know. And if you remember the 3C5X9 config file from earlier, or program, this was at 300 base address hex. Okay, now we can move on. Okay, this computer name is going to be MMPC20. The work group is in fact Elmhurst, and this is, again, the Tandy. Really? You're not going to let me hold shift and highlight that? MMPC Model 20. And Cirrus Logic Display, that looks good. All right, let's copy Windows files to your computer. Drum roll, please. I always love that drum roll. The very first time you install Windows 95, it kind of felt like it was giving you the drum roll. I don't know. I liked that kind of thing. And this actually won't take very long. Like, we're going to sit through it because this is not all that long. And also, this is what it was like. So you're going to see it just kind of zip right through this because it doesn't have to do much. It's really just preparing the machine directory. And there we go. Now this says it's ready to restart. You finish setup. And of course, it tells you, it says when Windows 95 is done, reboot the client. Of course, it's going to continue to boot into MS-DOS because I've not made some important changes on the server that we now have to make. Now back at the server, let's go create ourselves a profile as indicated in the instructions here. And this is going to be called Win95 E-Link 3. And now, as you probably remember from before, I have some Win95 options here. We'll choose Windows 95 3COM Etherlink 3. Okay. And now we have to associate the workstation record to change this client over to, there we go, Windows 95 E-Link. And we're going to hit OK. But wait, there's more. We can't quite go back to the Windows 95 client yet. We actually have to run a script that will update some files in the machine directory for this new installation before we continue booting. And that script is actually out in the WinNT directory here, so I've got my command window open still. We're just going to go out to cd whack WinNT, RPL, bin. Okay, and the program we're running is Win95CLT, and this wants to know the machine directory where the machine files are, and that is going to be C:\\machine MMPC20. Now, this does tell you can run it from the client. I tried that once, and it didn't go well. So I would recommend against that. I may have been doing something wrong, but I tried it a couple of times and didn't play nice. Okay, then it wants the RPL server, and this is whack Chicago suburb. and it wants the profile name that is associated with the client, and that is Win95 eLink 3. And if all goes well, there we go. All right, and that next step is our reminder here, which is very important. So it says, copied a bunch of files over. Don't forget to edit machines.ini. Now, pro tip here, folks. The first time I did this using Notepad, which should have played nice, but it didn't. When I recreated the file with MS-DOS Editor, it seemed to play nicer. So let's go do that. I could probably just go there. Machines.ini, of course, is going to be in the SPS directory. There it is, edit. Okay, there we go. And you'd see Windows 95, machines ini. We already have our thing. So we need the node address of this machine, which is 006008, and actually the MAC address up because it's on the RPL boot screen right now. 204779. Double check that. 006008204779. Okay, good. And it wants the path to the sysdata path. Now this is going to be the machine dir, g:\MMPC20. And then it wants to know the server share. And this is going to be g equals, it does have it in lowercase, that's okay. And this is going to be whack whack Chicago suburb whack machine. Okay. All right. Now it says reboot the Windows 95 client. Meet me there. Hey, thanks for meeting me here. Now we're ready to boot. This thing's been sitting on the BootWorks boot screen. It tells you to let it boot into MS-DOS, but because I have this little manual step, because of some ROM shenanigans, this was actually a more logical place to start. The thing didn't need to boot MS-DOS anyway, so let's give it a boot, and we should get a Windows 95 boot prompt. Okay, well, that's encouraging. We're MMPC20, and that is our password. I should get starting Windows 95. I'm going to hit escape. It'll show the boot splash. I don't want it to do that. Okay. Now it wants me to log in. This is where I log in with my username. So let's do that. I use my NT domain username. And now Windows should start setup. And normally this is where you'd be watching the Windows flag and the little scrolly thing on the bottom sliding by, but of course that's not going to be the case this time. It is kind of weird to think that I'm literally booting Windows 95 protective mode setup from a network. That's pretty cool. Okay, this should, okay. Before you log on, this particular machine, and I've seen others online have this problem with the installations, sometimes when you install Windows, it sets key registry values like WinBootDir and some other places to drive A. And when it does this, the thing will hit the A drive and try and copy files there during setup, drivers and things. You don't want that. So instead, what I have to do is I have to override that before continuing with setup. And this network logon prompt is the perfect place to intervene. So if you hit Control Escape at this prompt, you're going to get the task list. And now I can run Registry Editor. And let's just, I'll close you, maximize you, and you're going to go to HQ local machine, software, current version, or Microsoft, Windows, current version, setup. Okay, and there are a number of places. You can see here, bootdir, A drive. We need to change these to d:\winboot. And the reason for this is we need a writable place that we know will exist. And the D drive in WinBoot is actually the RAM drive, and once Windows boots into protected mode, it's no longer necessary. Where these files go is irrelevant. They're actually already there, but for some reason setup copies them. So there's 3 or 4 places where we have to go change this. We've got boot host, same thing. And we want to go host WinBootdir. Any place you find drive A. And there's only 4 of them. There we go, WinBootdir. Okay, so let's double check our work. We've got bootdir, dwinboot, boot host, dwinboot, host winbootdir, dwinboot, and no other A's in here. And you see a bunch of network paths. And then we've got on the bottom here, or next to the bottom, winbootdir, and that's also d:\winboot. Okay, this should now allow setup to function mostly normally. There's another little hiccup that we'll probably run into here I don't know what that's about, but okay. And now Windows is setting up any plug-and-play hardware that I might have. And now, if I did this right, the A drive won't start incessantly. Most folks just say ignore it, and you click cancel about 1,000 times. But A, that can't be great for the drive, and B, that's really annoying. So this is how I got around that without just trashing my A drive and tiring out my index finger on my right hand. And now I think this is time for a wine break. While I've been down here, the wife was nice enough to bring me down a nice Cabernet, and I'm going to sip it. It's too early for whiskey, folks. There we go. This happened the first time I did this, and I don't know why this is. But we're now going to witness the resilience of Windows 95 setup. Because, as you know, Windows 95 setup does have safe recovery options. It's actually fairly decent at recovering itself, especially for an operating system from 1995. So all I have to do is reboot the machine and go right back into setup again. Do the log on, and as soon as I log on to the network, the registry settings are already stuck, so I don't have to do those again, and it should continue setting up the system. So let's type in our password, and this time I'll let the Windows boot splash do its thing, and it will disappear when it goes to ask me to log on, which is just fine. We don't have to worry about that. I'll just log on, and then the Windows boot splash will come back, and you can look at all that purdy. Okay, here we go. Coming Chris, and this is my password. And there we are. Windows 95 is booting. This is the default boot splash. If you delete logo.sys, you know, that crappy one that comes when you install Internet Explorer, you get this old default one. This is my favorite one, the original 1995 one, and built into io.sys, I think. This is freaking nuts. There's no hard drive connected in this machine. It's literally booting off a network. That is so darn cool, folks. Yep, there we go. Set up the control panel. So for whatever reason, this I don't know if it's a hardware thing with this machine. It only does it once. Once Windows installs, it runs fine. You may not find that, but if you do run into that, where at the end of the hardware detection phase, the thing just blorps all over itself, give it a reboot and try to boot again. The first time this happened to me, because I did this a couple of times, I went chasing waterfalls trying to fix it rather than just trying to reboot and see what would happen. There we go, preparing help file for first use. All the usual Windows 95 setup bits. This is freaking amazing, folks. Like, I absolutely love this. Don't you dare. And I don't have any printers. Schedule. There we go, finalizing settings for my computer. So what do you think, folks? Windows 95 is actually running from a network, you know, 32-bit protected mode operating system. I know you're going to get me on that one, but it is the 32-bit protected mode, Windows 95 bits, and everything that comes with it. And it is running from a network without a hard drive. Let's take a look around. So if I go my computer, there's that RAM drive where I said copy the files to, and there's a bunch of files that copied up here. And these were already here. It just copied them over themselves. These are the exact same files that copied protman DOS, protman exe, all these protocol INI. They're already there, folks, and they're only needed to boot the machine. They're on a RAM drive that came up. You probably saw the thing go by when I first hit escape on the first boot there. We have the C drive is my CD-ROM drive. That's fun. A is my floppy drive, of course, and then I have my SBS and machine directories, which is where Windows lives. So here, this is the SBS directory where the primary Windows files all live, all the utilities, all the stuff. And then we have here the machine directories, and this is my MMPC directory. And here you can see I have files that are specific to this machine. So if I customize my start menu, or I change the registry, or I do anything like that, this is where all this stuff lives. So like here, my start menu. I've got a suboot folder that has, you know, command com and some real mode stuff in there. I've got control.ini. I've got also my config directory. Is that a MIDI file? I got send to, great. We also have, actually one thing I didn't look at and wish I had, let's go back in there. There's also the install log for this machine. So I can go back and I can look and see how it went on the installation, look at all the network adapt, validating, adding lines to winboot so you can see it building the auto exec. Path equals F command. Yeah, let's do that actually. If I run the command prompt and I go, you know, path, see it's GMMPC20 F whack command. So we're running entirely off of network drives. So let's take a look at an actual boot from zero here, folks. And I want to close these because Windows will open them back up. We're going to start shutdown. Now, you'll notice, because this is a network boot, there is no restart the computer into MS-DOS mode. You can't transition back from protected mode to real mode without rebooting the computer. So if you want real mode, you know, no. So let's hit restart the computer here. And now we'll look at what happens when the client starts after it's been set up. And this, by the way, you might sit here for a bit. I noticed this. I almost panicked and rebooted the machine, but exercised an unusual amount of patience for me. Sometimes I jump the gun, and then I have to deal with, you know, the file system problems and everything else comes with this, but I didn't do that this time. There we are, we're rebooting. And I've got my Control-Alt-B trigger finger all ready to go. If I were to do this permanently, I would see if I could get them ROM modified somehow, or find the correct part. So there is a utility, a BootWorks utility disk that will let you do this, but you need a part that is reflashable in the card, and I don't have that. So we're going to hit F10, and we're again. So this is the boot. It's going to prompt you for the machine account again. That's just to get the thing bootstrapped. Or MMPC 20. I should get a starting Windows 95. There we go. Now, the boot keys still work. F8, F5. Safe mode is a little different. In safe mode, there are things that do happen, like AutoExec packet is always processed, and there's some other network drivers are always loaded. Otherwise, Windows wouldn't start. So safe mode's a little different. It's not quite as safe as safe mode if you're booting from, you know, a hard disk. And I'm going to log on as Chris, and I'm going to type in my password. Now we'll let Windows 95 boot. And actually, when it's the only workstation on here, it's not half bad. When that gets done booting, maybe we'll just boot up its neighbor here and put them side by side. I just dropped my instructions, but that's okay. I don't really need them anymore. And here we go. I'm going to be prompted to log on to the network. So you have to log on 3 times. Once for your machine account, once for the transition to protected mode, and then the network client in protected mode wants to log you on so you can access resources. I'm sure users loved this. It probably confused the hell out of a lot of people, especially if you're not a computer person, right? If you're not a tech person. Hell, I can't get tech people to not be confused at simple shit. You know, let alone little commentary on my professional life, folks. Here we go. So close the welcome screen, and we are booted back up. And we have we've got the F and G, man. We've got our D drive again. That's, you know, you can do whatever you want with it. It just is there to boot the real mode side of things. We've got our control panels. Let's get us you know what? I always wonder why Windows did this. Let's get ourselves a wallpaper. I like that setup wallpaper. I love that. Where is that? Yeah. There we go. I like that wallpaper. That's fabulous. So that's Windows 95. It's installed. It still amazes me, fascinates me that these operating systems that I've mainly associated with booting from a hard disk, even though from the time Windows 95 came out, I knew it could boot from a network, but I've never seen it. I've never done it myself. Watching it on YouTube's one thing, but doing it yourself is another. And it fascinates me that an operating system instead like DOS, Windows, that we expect to boot from a disk actually supports not. And I'm so happy about that I'm going to boot the other machine up too, so we can see the fruits of all of our labor here. It just amazes me. You know, you look at the back of the box for Windows 95, 25 to 40 megs of hard disk space. Windows 3.1, if you had a floppy-based system, you weren't running that. And yet, of course, you didn't have a server and a network at the time. But if you did, you could, in fact, run them without hard disks. Of course, the setup to run them without a hard disk is way more expensive than, I don't know, a hard disk. But it does, in fact, work. And it is really, really nifty. And I have both of these machines running at the same time. If you're only running one on a 100 megabit link, it's actually pretty snappy, as you've seen. It's not absurdly slow. At the same time, if you start running more machines, like when I run both of these at the same time, they're doing file I/O, you might notice it a little bit, but it's not too bad. But one of the things that this remote boot scheme supports is multiple servers, spreading, SBS files around. So you'd probably have multiple remote boot servers for different classes of machines, probably multiple NICs in there, multi-home them, you know, do all that kind of stuff. We'll just start Windows here. But you really did have a pretty neat option available to you, and in performance-wise, it didn't suck, which is really effing cool. And of course, with Windows 95 on a domain network, you can use system or group policy on it. On a local machine, of course, you have system policy editor on the Windows 95 CD-ROM, but it is just amazing to me, and I know I'm kind of blathering on about this, but I'm a person who's fascinated with two things, Bootstrap and communications. I think that's probably clear from some things I do on this channel. And this is a neat one. I'm really glad I got to do it. I'm glad I had the hardware to do it. And this has just been an absolute treat. So let's wrap it up. Well, folks, I think that's going to do it. We've gone from zero to hero. We had just nothing but a base install Windows NT server, and now we can remote boot clients that run MS-DOS, Windows 3.1, and Windows 95. We've learned how to configure the machine, how to register new MAC addresses for drivers we already have, how to set up remote boot clients, what profiles are, what workstations are. We've learned about Windows 95 machine directories on networks, and how to set up all of these operating systems to work with Windows NT Server 4.0 Enterprise Edition as your server using the BootWorks ROM and my 3Com Etherlink 3 cards. This has been a whole ton of fun. It was a fun project to make work before I made a video of it. It was actually a lot of fun to video this. Not a lot went wrong, and pretty much what did you saw. So I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I hope you enjoyed this. I know it was long. I know there was a lot of blathering in there, but folks, I realize we live in an algorithm-driven world of TLDR, tell me now, soundbite, soundbite, and this is exactly the kind of thing that most people aren't going to watch because there are layers, there's nuance, it's a lot of things to do, it's a lot of work, and why can't you just show it working and move on? Because that's not the amount of work that goes into this, my friends. This was a shit ton of work. It was worth every second, and I love it, and I hope I get to revisit it, maybe with something like OS2. OS2 is remote boot capable on OS2 LAN server. So that's in the back of my mind. But, you know, don't take for granted the people that do the detail. I'm finding there are fewer and fewer of us. So with that in mind, for those of you that stuck with that, thank you. For those that didn't, I don't blame you. Thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for watching me do this. Next time, I'm sure whatever I'm doing will be a little more Tandy-centric, but this was a great everyday use of Tandy computers. And until next time, thanks for watching. Cheers. Stay classy.